remember? They're changing my voice. What are we on? Part 4? I was just talking about how righteousness and justice in Isaiah 11 and Proverbs 8 and Proverbs 16, 10 through 12, and on, all show that I'm right. Okay? That this is a universal thing. You say, why reading from the Bible? Again, I explain how I don't like the Bible, but there's enough truth there, and so many people look at it that, immediately those who are Christians, Jews, and Muslims should immediately say, he is right, because that's what they have in common is the Old Testament. Okay, Isaiah. They're all supposed to believe in Isaiah, basically. Okay, Christian, Muslims, and Jews. And these are universal principles, right? The ideal man is righteous and just. Okay, if you don't think so, then why don't you tell your daughter, if you have a daughter, to marry some wife-beating pedophile serial killer, right? And you say, well, that's different. What if they're just a beater and a pedophile? You see how there's degrees of righteousness. There's some people are more wicked than others, and some people are more righteous than others. Mr. Right, in his right mind, on the right path, doing the right thing, versus propagandist cowards putting on a show who are pure evil. Wolves in sheep's clothes and wolves who are in wolf's clothes. Okay. So, Isaiah 5:7. For the vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the figurative nation, and the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. And he looked for justice, but saw bloodshed, for righteousness, but heard cries of distress. So when you see the America, right, you see the so-called white man, the neo-colonialist, the white Jew and LGBT community, the corporate groups of these people, and they colonize the world, and they control the International Monetary Fund, with some powerful Asian countries, and, whatever bootlickers work with them in that regard, and the World Bank, and so on, and the United Nations, and so on and so forth, and the BRICS Alliance, and da-da-da-da-da. You hear about all this stuff, corporate partnerships. When all is said and done, they exploit the people in a certain way that causes violence, okay? So when God Almighty is saying, hey, I'm going to hold people accountable, he's just going to hold some starving African or some starving Asian or some starving Semite or some starving South American or whoever, accountable for them, some starving white person, accountable for them being hungry and killing someone and robbing them, and that's where it ends? No. It's first and foremost those people who created the situation by design in a calculated manner. The difference between premeditated, right, first, second, and third degree murder, for example. So the organized groups, the corporations, what have you, are guilty of organized terrorism and organized sin that causes so many people to starve to death every year, all this murder, so on and so forth. So God looked for righteousness and justice, especially with the leaders, okay, because no servant can be greater. And he saw a bunch of cowards who do things in a way that causes mass bloodshed and violence and cries of distress and cries from God's Son saying, give me my rightful place, crying out loud with a battle cry. He said, give me my rightful place, or what else? Or else God's judgment is going to come on you. And these people going, you don't know that. Oh, I'm not worried about it. Oh, whatever, right? And there's going to be hell to pay for them and their offspring, and that seeps into their brain function and their DNA and their very life essence and into their souls, their mind, body, soul, and spirit, as they hated God with all their heart, all their soul, and all their spirit. If they're complicit with these things, which they are. There isn't a rich person on the planet who isn't guilty of sin. There's no other way to look at it. See Luke 23:28. Jesus turned and said to them, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. Just like in the Ten Commandments. Say God punishes the children, okay, for the sin of the parents. And obviously when the end comes, it's not just 3 or 4 generations. It's all their offspring, because they're cut off from God. And Jesus warned them time and time again. He said the end will come. Isaiah warned them, Jeremiah, Hosea. It's all throughout the Bible. One of the main themes of the Bible is the end is going to come one day, and everyone who's left behind is going to be cut off from God and be more and more pitiful every moment, because they're living in rebellion and piling their sins to heaven more and more every moment. As the saying goes. So he says, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Do not say, oh, it's so sad that you're persecuted. He said, quit being a dumb bitch and rally to me. Or else weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you say, blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. When you start saying, man, we don't approve of the direction of this country. And people say, people are going to hell in a handbasket. That the action of saying that is like saying, blessed are the childless women, the breasts that never nursed and the womb that never bore. When you're being coerced into marriage, when they're telling you who to date and who not to date. Okay? your being, the inside of your being is screaming that you're better off not having kids, but there's some brain function, problem, biologic dysfunction, brain function, physiological issues. They cause you to start acting like complete bitches and breeding anyway. You see what I'm saying? So when Jesus says to Pilate, Pilate said, you have said you're the king of the Jews. He said, you have said so. He said, your actions have said so. So their actions, their being has said that blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. Because only little devils are being born, with all due respect, and none is due. Then they will say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. Citing Isaiah 10. He said they did not have a king. I see in Hosea 10. We said they do not have a king because they did not worship God and obey God. It said that they had sowed wickedness and injustice. And then because they kept doing that spiritually and physically, and they eventually, their actions say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. And of course, there's the beast in Revelations, whose some of his body parts stand for the hills. There's the Mount Zion, right? And there's a mountain that's thrown into water in Revelations, a mountain all ablaze, right? So these are figurative things. To make a long story short, they will say to the idea, they will say, put them out of their misery, to the idea of the beast and to God. They say, fall on us, cover us. They say, punish us. So they're saying, on the one hand, because there are two different interpretations of this, they're saying to cover them and keep them from getting abused by God's wrath, and they can't stand before God. They're saying, put them out of their misery. And they're also saying, okay, so they're also saying, I kind of lost my train of thought here. They're saying, put them out of their misery. They're saying, keep them from harm's way. They're also saying, punish us. They're saying, punish them. They're saying, you're the mountain of the Lord. They're asking for it, right? Okay. Now we get to Ezekiel 15. Let's just shoot through this. I want to finish this part. We've got half a page to go here. And we'll get through 18 through 23 and wrap it up. All right. Ezekiel 15, Jerusalem is a useless vine. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, how is the wood of a vine different from that of a branch from any of the trees in the forest? Okay. So how is the wood of the vine different? Okay. This goes back to the righteous thriving like a green leaf, right? So the vine, right, he says this is what happens when the vine is green, right? If people do things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? So in Ezekiel, it's talking about the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel, and God says to him, how is the wood of a vine different from that of a branch of any of the trees? So Jesus is the tree of life. He's in the tree of life. He is the tree of life. You see what I'm saying? He is the way, the truth, and the life. Okay, so he says, and the fruit of the tree, right, is righteousness and justice and wisdom. Okay, so he says, how is that different from that? And then later in Luke, in the Bible, it then refers to the vine again, because Ezekiel is before Luke 23, where Jesus says, if people do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? Okay, so it says, Jerusalem is a useless vine. The Jews on this earth, Ezekiel is saying, like all the other prophets basically, that they're useless. They're not doing God's work. And they're not producing God's fruit. So it says, look to the righteous, not to the people who call themselves Jews. Okay. Is wood ever taken from it to make anything useful? Do they make pegs from it to hang things on? And after it is thrown to the fire as fuel, and the fire burns both ends and chars the middle, is it then useful for anything? If it was not useful for anything when it was whole, how much less can it be made into something useful when the fire has burned it and it is charred? Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says, is I have given the wood of the vine among the trees of the forest as fuel for the fire, so will I treat the people living in Jerusalem. I will set my face against them. Although they have come out of the fire will yet consume them. And when I set my face against them, you will know that I am the Lord. So he says, look, they came out of the fire of Egypt and other conflicts that God had them faced with, like in Judges 3, when he puts these other nations around them to teach them warfare and to teach them to stand firm for righteousness and justice in the face of adversity. Some people learned the lesson, some people didn't, and he's purging them away. He says, how does Jacob atone for his sin? He rallies to the righteous king that God chooses, that's me, okay, and leaves with him and starts reproducing. And those who don't, those who rebel and don't stop reproducing, what have you, they go to hell. They stay on earth until they die, then they go to hell. And their offspring are cut off and go to hell. That's what it's getting at. It's putting away this confusing so that people who are playing a stupid game can play stupid about that, like they're playing stupid about a great many things, like their natural characteristics and so on and so forth. Okay, because again, Acts is a book in the Bible. Acts, acting and scripture, right? It's a script, a theater, Greek theater script. The Greeks translated the Bible as the story goes and so on and so forth. All right. There's all these stupid Greek fraternities and societies and Freemasons with Greek theme and Club of Rome and so on and so forth. Anyway, I will set my face against them. Okay, so that's how you know that he's God, right? God is exalted and known by his righteous acts, his just acts. I will make the land desolate because they have been unfaithful, declares the sovereign Lord. That's when Ezekiel 15 ends. It's a short chapter. I suggest you read Ezekiel 15 and Luke 23, 28 through 31. And you understand what I'm getting at. And also look up Proverbs, where it says the righteous thrive like a green leaf. Okay, Matthew 7. The wise and foolish builders. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who has built his house on the rock. Remember, Jesus says, on this rock we will build the church, right? What church? The church in the spiritual realm, the congregation of God, the body of Christ. He said, I'll destroy this body and rebuild it in 3 days, right? He's talking about his physical body, and he's talking about rebuilding it spiritually, right? The spirit is everything, the flesh means nothing, is what Jesus says in the Bible. All right. The rain came down, right? The wise man built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. Now, what's the rock? It's righteousness and justice. It's universal pinpoint and moral precision. It's the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order. You know them by their works, by their righteousness and justice. And that includes David and Goliath. When the other Jews didn't stand firm, they fled. And the top martial artist in the story at the time, who was David, is what he's superimposed on, David, he stood against Goliath and conquered him in principle first and foremost. Just like Jesus, who died on a cross, which is shaped like a sword, who said he came to bring a sword and teach you to be a model, teach you to be a martyr, to pick up your cross and to follow him. John the Baptist, what have you. Okay, their victories are in principle. I'm running out of time here, so let's just shoot through this. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching. Notice it's like he's threatening them in a sense. He's saying, if you don't obey God and come into this vine, I am the true vine. If you don't obey God and come into me, into my spirit, that your souls and your offspring are going to go to hell. Okay? And one day, I am the first and the last. One day it will be done, and you'll have no way, your offspring will have no way to go to heaven. Okay? The rain came down, so building on the sand. Remember, Set is a deity of sand. Horus is a deity of the jungle, right? The forest, the fertile land. The rain, where to reproduce in the spiritual realm and not on earth at this time, right? The world is no longer fertile. It's no longer receiving these ideas. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teacher of the law. He didn't teach like some geek, hey guys, I'm a Pharisee, and I'm going to teach you this, this, and this. He said, I'm a martial art king with divine might, right? The mighty one, Psalm 45. Riding forth in the cause of truth, justice, and humility. All right, so 18. How can females, by their dating arguments, argue that shallow is superior to deep, or that deep is superior to profound? They even argue that fantasy is superior to morally precise reality by their actions, right? 19. By their actions, they argue for rape, cult, and child molester aligned so-called sexual prowess and sexual superiority. That's garbage. 20. Evil people should not have a say in the direction of humanity. 21. Pharaoh was chosen to lead, and not Joseph or any of the Jews in rebellion at the time. So what is the moral of that part of the story? 22. Consider the types of people in society that they date. 23. The Ten Commandments actually are universal morals when considered with a scale of universal pinpoint and moral decision. The Jews in the story are said to have